Governor, it's good to see you again.
You too, Jason.
You have served 2 terms in office. You've scored major conservative wins. What in the world do you want to do in a 3rd term, 4 more years in office if elected?
The most important thing is to keep Texas the #1 state for economic opportunity. We also want to keep Texas advancing educationally. Remember this important fact. When I first became governor, I was shocked to learn that other states were leading Texas as it concerned Tier 1 research universities. I promised to double that, and now Texas has more Tier 1 research universities than any other state in the United States. Same thing applies to our K-12 schools, and that is today Texas has more blue ribbon K-12 schools than any other state in the United States. So we want to continue advancing educationally, economically, but also with individual liberties to make sure that the freedoms that Texans have always enjoyed, which candidly are different than the way they are in some other states, that those freedoms are going to be protected.
Governor, let me ask you about abortion. Speaking of which, many women say it's freedoms as well too. Republican State Senator Bob Nichols announced late last month, which I'm sure you saw, that he will support an exception under the state's abortion law for rape. If the legislature passed that, is that something you would sign into law?
Well, listen, we'll see that there's going to be a lot of different proposals that will come up over the course of the upcoming session. And I'm going to tell you what I'm going to focus on, and that is, one, making sure that nothing that Beto supports, like abortion to the very last second before a child is born, would be allowed. Even denying health care to a child who survives an abortion. But second, something that really does need to be done, and that is clarify what it means to protect the life of the mother. There have been some comments and even maybe some actions by some doctors that are not taking care of women who have an ectopic pregnancy or who have a miscarriage, and that is wrong because neither of those two are abortions. But that said, I've even seen some other situations that some women are going through where they're not getting the health care they need to protect their life. Jason, the point is this. Our goal is to make sure we protect the lives of both the mother and the baby. And there's been too many allegations that have been made about ways in which the lives of the mother are not being protected. And so that must be clarified.
But just generally speaking, is a carve-out for abortion, for rape or incest in the state's abortion law, is that something you could generally support, or would you oppose that?
Well, the goal, Jason, is to protect the lives of both the mother and the baby.
Even for rape or incest?
Well, again, we want to see if there are ways that we can make sure that the lives of both the mother and the baby can be protected. That's our focus.
Property taxes.
Sure.
The biggest property tax bill that any Texan pays is for the school districts, which we all know. We're all getting our taxes right now. We looked at Fort Worth ISD for an example in Tarrant County. In 2015, the state contributed 45% of the money the district needs to operate. In 2020, the state gave 30%. These are the district's numbers. And then this school year, the state contribution is 27%. The less the state pays, Governor, you know, that means the more that property owners pay and renters pay. I'm curious why this has dropped so much under your watch over the last 8 years.
Yeah. The reality, and I'd like to dig into those numbers because I can tell you the reality, and that is when you look at what we did in 2019 that we followed up with in 2021, we provided well over $10 billion in additional funding for schools across the state. I can tell you this, no governor's provided more funding for education than I have. No governor's provided more funding for teacher pay raises than I have. And importantly, per pupil funding is at an all-time high right now. And when you go back and look at the funding that we provided in those last 2 sessions, we did it intentionally to buy down the property tax rates of the school districts. And if you look at most school districts across the state of Texas, those property tax rates on average are at least 10% lower than they were before 2019. Then on top of that, what I'm talking about with my property tax reduction by using at least $13.5 billion that have been generated because of our economic success in the state.
Next year's surplus.
Yeah, surplus. To use that to further buy down those property tax rates.
Do you see it ever getting back to parity where the state contributes half and local property owners contribute the other half? Because it's been out of whack for a while.
To be clear, my goal is to eliminate the maintenance and operation component of the school district property tax. And so what I want to do, we already have a property tax reduction fund that exists in the state of Texas. Anytime we have any session where we have any surplus, I want to continue to put money into that fund to reduce property taxes on an ongoing basis until that maintenance and operation component of school property taxes is completely eliminated.
How long will that take?
Well, when we have surpluses like we have this year, it won't take very long.
Let's talk about accountability after Uvalde. You know, Governor, 91 state troopers were there on the scene that day in May. More than a half dozen are under investigation, as you stated multiple times. The DPS director, Steve McCraw, said he wishes the state took more control that day at Robb Elementary. Is Steve McCraw's position safe under your watch?
What he wanted to see is the standard that applies in the state of Texas. It's called the Columbine Protocol, and what that means is that if what happened in Uvalde happens, you're supposed to run immediately toward the shooter and take the shooter out. And so he's frustrated about the fact that any officer, whether they're a DPS officer or some other type of officer, did not follow that protocol. He wants to make sure there is accountability for that. I want to make sure there is accountability for that. As you probably know, there are ongoing investigations by the FBI, by the Department of Justice, by the Texas Rangers, and by the district attorney. And all of these investigations will lead to all of the evidence, and when we get all of the information that we need, then ultimate decisions will be made about everyone who will be held accountable. Just to emphasize what you said, there are about a dozen DPS officers who are under investigation. I think there are 2 who are already suspended. And so we want to make sure, whether it be DPS or local police or the school police or federal officials, anyone who stood around for more than an hour in that school not following the Columbine Protocol, there needs to be some measure of accountability.
But Governor, this wasn't a lone state trooper who did this, as you know. It wasn't a half dozen. There were 91 state troopers there who did not go in. Would you, based on the outcome of the investigations that are out there right now, would you consider firing Steve McCraw for what happened that day?
You know, any hiring or firing decision will be based upon the evidence. And we got to get to the evidence, get to the bottom of exactly what happened to see who is accountable and why they did wrong.
Let's talk about the border for a moment. Busing migrants, I believe the latest number I saw reportedly cost about $12 million so far to date. I want to ask about the cost to keep them here, because that's what really hasn't been reported a lot, Governor. We were in McAllen for the debate between you and Beto O'Rourke, and we were asking the mayor of McAllen, Javier Villalobos, about the cost. I said, is there a line item budget that you actually have, a line item in your budget that pays for this? He said, our cost locally is zero. The feds pay for it. So I'm curious, what is the financial cost that Texas has in this that you want other northern cities to start, carrying?
Well, I think the mayor of New York made clear. The mayor of New York, who has only part of the number of people that we've bused, he's saying that he needs $1 billion to pay for that. When you look at education costs, healthcare costs, housing costs, all the other details, he says it's going to cost $1 billion for them to be able to deal with a minor fraction of what Texas is having to deal with. You would have to look in each subcomponent, whether it be healthcare, education, welfare, all different types of subsectors. And so that's why there's no one location you go to find that number.
You have one election ahead of you here, not too much longer before the election, but people have mentioned your name as possibly running for the White House. If Texas reelects you, is that something you would consider in a couple of years?
I have one job I'm focused on, and that's governor of Texas, period.
Do you have aspirations for higher office, Governor?
My only goal is governor of Texas.
Governor, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Jason.